Cliff Richard, your autobiography is called Which One's Cliff? When you look back, we won't say how many years, to those early clips of you singing and films like Summer Holiday, how do you feel now?
Well, in the case of Summer Holiday, I mean, I feel very proud of that film. I mean, I thought it was a good film. If you'd mentioned The Young Ones, for instance, although it was a huge success, I didn't like me in it. So, you know, when I look back at those days, it's a mixture of almost embarrassment and sometimes a great deal of pride.
Because when you started, parents were shocked, and I think one newspaper said you were too sexy for TV and you were called the bad boy of pop.
Well, it was all true, of course. I mean, it's a funny thing, things change so drastically, so that what we were doing in those days seems like, well, absolutely nothing. And the thing was that Elvis had this great, huge sort of the sex symbol image in the States, and they wanted desperately to have somebody to counterpart him here. And I filled the bill because I looked similar. I didn't look like Elvis, but, you know, we pulled the same kind of poses. And so they used me as a kind of saying, well, this is our one. But of course, it wasn't entirely true. They just built things around it. And they used to try and analyze why we were doing our rock and roll. And the Shadows and I were just doing it because we enjoyed that music. And I'd read things. I'd read that this guy's eyes will smolder. So I used to read that and think, oh, my eyes smolder. Right. I used to go on stage going, huh? And trying to live up to what they were telling me, you know, about myself. And so it's all a big joke, really. I think the media are a very funny group of people sometimes, I must admit. They actually create things themselves, and then the bands take over and believe what they've read about themselves and begin to live it, and they've got it.
But how do you feel about that now? Because you were being manipulated by the publicity machine as a very young and very innocent person.
No, not by the publicity machine, only by the media. But you see, they never did manipulate me. And that's why a lot of them don't like me now, because I didn't stay the way they wanted me to stay. I didn't actually fit the bill. And when they could find someone else to take over, they did. I mean, automatically. And now I feel a great deal of resentment in many cases that I'm even at all successful, because I don't fit the bill at all. I never really did at all. But at my time, there wasn't anybody else doing it as well as the Shadows and I did it. We had the field to ourselves virtually. There was Marty Wilde, Billy Fury. They were the original sort of great British rock singers. But somehow or another, I don't know why, but they didn't stay in the competition. I don't know why they didn't stay in it, because, I mean, Marty was brilliant, and so was Billy Fury. And somehow or another, they left the field clear for the Shadows and I. And so the media had to deal with us. I mean, we weren't going to go away. But as soon as they could find someone else who truly fitted the bill, as soon as people started to spit at the audience and swear on stage, great, this is what we always wanted. Well, if that's what the public want, of course, then they get what they deserve, I feel. But it's not what I want. It's not what I'm going to do. I shall never, ever compromise on that, in that area, ever. Because if there's one thing I can do now is to prove to people that you can be a rock pop singer and not be all those things that the media make out we are. We are not sex maniacs. We are not drug addicts. We are not crude exhibitionists. We're not rude to the public. I'm not. And I'm successful. So, I mean, if one person can do it, it means that it's wide open to others. And so I can never quite understand why the media still insist on creating this dark image of rock and roll.
But you are fairly exceptional. If you ask anybody about the four greats in the last 25 years, your name will come up: Elvis, the Beatles, the Stones. The other three's lives seem to be entwined with drugs, with violent deaths, with mystical religion and so on.
Yeah.
You somehow have never ever got involved in all that sort of thing. Why are you so different?
Well, I mean, very early on, of course, about 18 years ago, I became a Christian. Now, it seems to me that I could have gone the way of the sort of, I could have taken that mystic pathway. Because obviously there was a time, and it arrived about 20 years ago, when I was dissatisfied with what I was. I mean, I was successful, but it wasn't fulfilling enough. And so therefore I started to look into spiritual areas. Now, my good fortune was that because of my Christian background, I looked at that first. I thought, well, let's check it out. I had all these little memories about Jesus and various miracle stories and all that. And I thought, well, there it is. It's on my doorstep. I'll check it out. If it's untrue, I'll move on. Now, if I discovered to be untrue, I would have moved on. There's no doubt I would have gone for the Far Eastern, the mystical trip. There's no doubt about it in my mind, because I definitely needed some spiritual, you know, uplifting. But you see, again, my good fortune was that I went straight to the top. I mean, there isn't another man in the whole history of mankind that was anything like Jesus. Nobody. There have been other great men, no doubt about it. There have been terrific men, but nobody claimed to be the Son of God. No one did and said the things that he did. So when I came to look into it, I thought, this is amazing. I mean, the guy's either a liar or it's true. Kind of no half measures. And after reading a great deal, I mean, I read the Bible. It became my staple diet for a couple of years. And I read a few commentaries and books about Jesus. And I came to my conclusions that that was it. So that when I became a Christian, all the things that the Bible show you to be right became what I aimed at. And if there's a difference between myself and the Rolling Stones, it's that. It's because I found a way of life that was totally fulfilling, 10 times more exciting than theirs. I'm convinced that my life is 10 times more exciting than theirs, because, all right, they have records in the charts, so do I. But I've been to Bangladesh, I've been to Nepal, I've been to Southern Sudan, I've been involved with real people. I live outside show business. So all that they have, I've got, plus another 90%, because rock and roll's only 10% of life. I mean, I love it, it's my favorite form of music, but it didn't offer me salvation. And it doesn't. In fact, it's the death of a lot of people. So, I mean, all that came about because I became a Christian.
But how did you end up in mainstream Christianity? Because I think your first introduction was to the Jehovah's Witnesses, because your mum was a baptized JW.
No, my mum wasn't. I was the first person to introduce the Jehovah's Witness philosophy into my family. I came back from the States having met Jehovah's Witnesses and being very impressed by their zeal, by their comradeship, and it was very impressive. And at that time, as I say, I was really seeking for some kind of spiritual reality, and I saw all these people being very loving to each other, and I thought, this is wonderful. So I came home and I told my family all about it, and it was after I turned away from it, in fact, that my mother and sisters became baptized. One sister and my mother. And I just could never quite, you see, I was almost ashamed of being, when the press came and said, you're a Jehovah's Witness, I'd say, no, I'm not. I couldn't commit myself to that. It just was not reality for me. And it wasn't until I became a Christian, and here's the difference. As soon as I became a Christian and the press said to me, are you a Christian? I said, yeah. I had no qualms whatsoever. It's because nowhere in the Jehovah's Witness philosophy is there any room for a relationship with Jesus. Nowhere is there any room for assurance. That's why I didn't want to say I was a Jehovah's Witness, because there was nothing concrete. All right, there were a lot of great facts, because, I mean, let's face it, the Jehovah's Witnesses read their Bibles. I still understand how they read the Bible so much, and yet miss the pure essence, which is saying, is it John that wrote down saying, these things are written that you will know that you're saved. No, not think I might be. And I've spoken to so many Jehovah's Witnesses, and you say, are you saved? Do you have salvation? And they say, I wouldn't presume to say that. And I say, but wait a minute, God's given us this fantastic thing that says, you may now, as a Christian, presume to have salvation. You didn't earn it, you don't deserve it, but I've given it to you. That's what God says. And I never got that from Jehovah's Witnesses. And as soon as I got into mainstream Christianity, this is what they talked about. This is what I felt I had. And so therefore I could look straight in the eye of any TV camera or press man and say, yeah, I'm a Christian. But I couldn't say I was a Jehovah's Witness because there was too much missing there. And I could never understand how good friends that I know, intelligent men that I know, can remain within that sect, because it has no salvation to offer other than the stuff you work for. And as far as I can read, you cannot work or buy salvation. It's given to you.
People talk about saying yes to Jesus and accepting him into their life and so on. That's what you did. That sounds terribly easy.
It is, you see. The thing, of course, is that what I discovered was that becoming a Christian was easy. We tend to go at it tooth and nail, in a way hoping that it's going to be a real tough thing. In other words, because our ego says, I'm going to do this, you know. I'm going to understand this. And all the time our mind is saying, it's me, I want to understand it. Whereas in point of fact, it's far simpler than that. I mean, what Jesus says is that if you invite me into your life, I'll come in. Now, that is the basic principle that, I mean, becoming a Christian is that. It's saying, all right, I know you're there, please enter my life. Being a Christian isn't just that. I mean, then it goes on. Of course, once you become a Christian, you find that you're motivated by all sorts of, I mean, you want to know more. But once you've taken that initial step of saying, all right, come into my life, and you now know that you are, yes, I'm a Christian, you then want to serve God more. You want to understand him more. So therefore, you want to read more. But they don't They're secondary things. I mean, you can't become a Christian and then sit back and say, well, that's it then. Obviously, it does lead to other things. But basically, it is as simple as that. And most people, I mean, most people that I speak to who are not Christians, they say, well, you know, we wish we had your faith, but, you know, we couldn't do it. And they forget that really it's not them that's going to do it anyway. God does everything for them anyhow. It's all been done. At the crucifixion, all our main problems were nailed. And all we've got to do is accept that fact and then begin to live that fact. But we do try to make it difficult for ourselves, and it's not that difficult. Being a Christian is difficult. Becoming one isn't.
Many people feel that the Christian faith is something to grab hold of when you're down and you've got problems. What does it do for you when you're up and apparently have no problems and at the top of your profession and so on?
There's nobody that has no problems, because, you know, people like, if you can quote, obviously the showbiz fraternity are the best ones to quote because everyone looks up to them and thinks that they have everything in life. But like one of the most famous, we talk about sex symbols, one of the most famous actresses, sex symbols, whatever, is Marilyn Monroe. She died at, what, 36? Leaving a pathetic message saying, I wish I could be made all over again. I mean, rich, you couldn't imagine it. Hollywood, gloss, photographed probably more than any other woman in the world, and there's nothing there. So there's no area that has no problems. I have my problems. I don't always think it's the right thing to do to, you know, present them to the public all the time. I don't want them to see my problems. I can deal with those. And in my industry, for instance, people come, they pay to see me behaving in a specific way. And it's not the way of the man who's weighed down with problems. They want to see someone who's freed of that. So I show them that side of my life. But I can't pretend that I don't have emotional ups and downs and disappointments in relationships, in successes of records or whatever, you know. They're all there. We've all got the problems. And what Christ does for me, though, has given me a reason for doing what I do. He doesn't say that he'll take away all the problems there are in the world. He does say that he'll get you through them, though. So that what he does for me is what he does for everybody else, which has become the reason for your living, the reason for your doing what you do. And if we do, in fact, do our work because Jesus is at the center of our lives, our work improves drastically. Try it, whether you be a milkman or a rock and roll singer. And, you know, it's just a way of life. That Christianity is a way of life. It's more than a way of life, of course, but it does for me what it does for everyone else. It creates a reason for me to be what I am.
But many people must look at you and say, well, it's okay for you, you're successful, you're wealthy, and so on. What do you have to say to people who say that, you know, as Jesus said, give up all that you have and follow me? What in sacrificial terms have you given up to become a Christian?
First of all, there's two parts. Try and remember what you've asked because I might forget. There's two parts, really. People might say it's all right for me. Well, you see, I can understand why they say that, because they see me as being someone who's certainly not poor, someone who's famous and apparently has everything. But what they have to remember is that there's only one of me. There aren't many Christians in show business. Most of the Christian world is made up of the people who would ask me that question. Most of the Christian world are made up by people who go to work from 9 till 5. Most of the people are not wealthy. Most of them are struggling to pay for their mortgages. Ask them why it is important to be a Christian. I just happen to be one of the fortunate few human beings who's not in that category. So it's an invalid thing to sort of use it, because sometimes people ask that question using it as a reason for why they shouldn't become a Christian. You know, they can't say, oh, well, he can afford it. He can afford to be holy. Because most people who are Christians are not wealthy people. 99.9% of them are not. So I'm not a typical representative of Christianity. You've got to go down to this man in the street and say, why are you a Christian? Why do you find it valid? And his answers will be exactly the same as mine. Only our situations and positions in life are different. Now, what was the second part?
It was a sacrificial element.
Oh, yeah.
What have you given up to become a Christian?
The hardest thing to give up is yourself. It's not money. It's not even time. The whole point of becoming a Christian says, this is me, and I now present myself to you. Because ego is a terrible area of our being. And no one likes to admit that they're wrong, let alone that they are sinful individuals. And sin is not just swearing or telling a lie here and there. Sin is a corrosive thing, and it leads to death. And no one wants to admit that they're bad. I remember doing a radio interview, and And I don't think she'll mind me mentioning her name. She was a girl called Kathy McGowan, who used to do Ready, Steady, Go, was on the same little panel, and we were discussing our faith. And Kathy said, she was Catholic, and she said, I really am not a sinner. And I was amazed then, you see, because it taught me, I thought, well, that's fantastic. There's a big difference between Kathy and myself. The one thing that I knew, certainly as a Christian, that I was a sinner, and that was a time I had to come to in my life. The greatest sacrifice I had to make was to say, I am not as fantastic as I thought I was, and as the rest of the world paints me. I am actually a nobody, a nothing. And it's one area that we all have in common. God didn't ask me to give up all my money, but the funny thing is, in my book, Which One's Cliff, I did do a chapter called My Little Isaac. And I considered you see, I've considered all this money thing many, many times. I don't think God wants us to be poverty-stricken. It's just that most of the world happens to be. But you see, the story of Solomon is a great leader as to how we should look at money and look at fame. God gave Solomon all that money, so God doesn't think money's bad. And he didn't expect Solomon to sacrifice it all back to him. And it seems to me that when I planned to leave my career, which is what I did plan when I first became a Christian, I thought, right, well, I shouldn't be earning this money and I shouldn't really be this famous. And I planned to give it up. I called the press conference and I said, I'm giving it up. I don't know when, I've got commitments to finish, but when they're through, I'll be giving it up. And to me, that was because Abraham and Isaac was this terrific story. I mean, people who don't know, I'm sure they all do. But Abraham was actually willing to present Isaac as a sacrifice, burning him, because God had said, I want Isaac as a sacrifice. And the moment that Abraham was prepared to do it, and had tied him up and put him onto the actual altar, and was about to kill him, God says, hold it. Okay, now I know that you really care for me. So in a minor way, my story is nowhere near as dramatic as that, but there is a parallel. My Isaac is my career. It's all I have. I only have an O-level in 2 subjects, English language and RI. I left school when I was 16 and a half. When I was 17 and a half, I made my first record. I can't do anything else. So all I have is this, my career. And it was 17 years ago, I believe, that when I finally said, okay, God, I'll give it up, that he suddenly said, okay, now that you're prepared to give it up, don't give it up. And that was the parallel I tried to draw, that my sacrifice didn't actually come about, but I was prepared to make it. And that's all God wants us to do. If we're prepared to give him 100%, he doesn't always take the 100%. Why do people always assume that we have to die for what we believe? We have to be prepared to die. I mean, there aren't many martyrs. God doesn't expect us all to die. In fact, a lot of the time, 99% of the time, he wants us to live presenting him to people. He doesn't want us to be martyrs. He doesn't want us to be poverty-stricken. He doesn't want us to be starved. I don't know why people always think that that's the ultimate.
You said a few moments ago that you were fairly unique as a Christian because of your lifestyle and so on. Does that put an enormous responsibility on you because of your public behavior and in a sense, your responsibility to your public?
Yes, it does. It's become less of a weight because over the years I've gathered a lot of friends, you know, and a lot of people have begun to understand what it is to be a Christian in my particular position. And therefore I have, hundreds, if not thousands of people who pray very regularly for my particular witness. And I find it very beneficial because I've certainly found in the last 2 or 3 years that I've been able to come on far stronger about it, far more confidently, far more, you know, at peace with myself and at peace with my situation. And I know that it is a responsibility, and of course it's always going to be a worry for me that one day one's only got to slip up once, and you know full well that the media won't say, oh, Cliff Richard said or did this, and that's naughty. They'll always add, and this guy says he's a Christian. I mean, they'll knock my faith, that's without a doubt. And that's where the pressure lies, and that's why the more people who are willing to pray for me to be sure that I'm held up, you know, with the strength that comes from their prayers, the better, really. But it is a terrific responsibility. I mean, I'm very aware of it. I'm aware of it not only as a Christian, though. I mean, I just feel that in my industry, we're notorious for being irresponsible idiots, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, how can a grown man pour marmalade and honey all over the first-class compartment of a jumbo jet? Come on. I'm not going to name any names, but those of you who've got memories will know who I'm talking about. And it is nonsense. I find that ludicrous, particularly as I admire the person as a singer. I mean, it destroys me a little. But I find that quite amazing. And responsibility as a non-Christian should be there. Why aren't we concerned for all those people that look to us and say, you know, these are our idols, you know, we'll emulate them. And it seems to me that there are a lot of alleged adults who actually behave worse than most 10-year-olds I know.
But you're still very conscious, as you've said, of the vultures of the media waiting for you to put a foot wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, that must play havoc with your personal life, that if you're seen with any individual, automatically marriage is on the stocks. I mean, it's impossible to be yourself.
Yeah, well, it is, although I've come to terms with that to a great extent. You know, there's nothing I can do about it, really. And fortunately, longevity is on my side. I've been doing this for 25 years. The public pretty well know me now. They know what I stand for, they know what I do. And quite often, if I'm, for instance, misquoted, people will say, you know, the butcher will say, "You didn't really say that, did you?" They already know that I wouldn't say that. You know what I mean? So all that's on my side. The press now are totally helpless, as far as I'm concerned, anyway. They really can't damage me anymore. I can only damage myself. If I actually do something that's wrong, then I get what I deserve, I guess. You know, I mean, I'll just get what I deserve. But all I can say to people is that I am not some superhuman being. I mean, I am not some great plaster saint. And so therefore, if I do make a mistake, please just realize that I've made a mistake. It doesn't mean anything to my faith. It just means I've let Jesus down. The fact that everyone has to deal with is Jesus and not me. It's unfortunate that we live in a world that we do put people on pedestals, and we are public images, and people do look to us. But in this instant, there is no way that people can judge Christianity by what I am, by what I say, or by what I do. Because one has to revert that whole question that Jesus asked his disciples. Who do you say that I am? It doesn't matter what Cliff says, or anybody says, or what they do. It's what people think of Jesus, and what they do with their lives. If I make a mistake in my life, it shouldn't color their decision at all. Their decision is between them and Jesus. Is Jesus wrong? Was he bad? Is he the Son of God or isn't he? And that's where it all stands or falls, not by what I do or say.
But personal relationships must be very difficult, because I would think many, many people are attracted to you as a person really because you're Cliff Richard, and forget that underneath you're really Harry Webb.
Not anymore. I changed my name by deed poll, but I know what you mean. Yes, I suppose that's true. But usually, you see, how many friends do you expect in life? I mean, I've got a feeling that if you've got a dozen friends, you're really well off. Because there's not time to give yourself to a lot of people. You give yourself to half a dozen people who know more about you than anybody else in the world. And that's about it. And then you've got a lot of people who you call friends, but they'll never be as deep because you don't have time to spend with them, for instance. You know, that kind of thing. So my relationships, I have all the relationships I want. I have a load of friends. And there are some friends who, because I don't know, for whatever reason, have become closer to me over the years than most other people because we've spent time together. And it's all I need. You know, I don't have to pursue a lot of relationships, and I don't have to do it publicly. But obviously in some cases, if I'm seen out with Sue Barker, then we're both public figures. And it's a story, you know, but I don't mind that. I didn't like it very much when they started to speculate about Sue and I before we'd ever talked about anything serious. I thought that was a bit jumping the gun, and I then pulled the blinds. Sue and I talked, and we said, right, we don't tell him anymore. I don't see why we should. We don't have to disclose what we discuss and what we feel about our futures when we don't even know about our futures ourselves. So there's a way of doing it. If people want to say Cliff and Sue date, great, it's the truth. And seem to get on well, that's the truth too. But there's nothing else to tell, and so therefore now with the press, you may have noticed, they've been a bit quiet because we've just said, oh, there's nothing more to say and we're not going to talk to you anymore. And that's it. And well, we do have that availability. I mean, that's available to me. I can pull out whenever I want.
But you can't go anywhere in Britain and now anywhere in the world without being recognised.
No, that's true, but then I wouldn't want to. I don't want to go places and not be recognised, because I mean that's a slight against my career. If I want to go somewhere where I want not to have to sign autographs and not be spotted, I look up in my royalty sheets and find that I haven't sold many records in America, so I go there, you know? And I can go to, there's quite a few places. You can go to Barbados or something where few people might know you. And this is the perks of being in show business, that in fact you can afford to find your privacy. Because it is vital that you have a private life. It is vital. But there again, I can't expect to go anywhere in England and be left alone, because I'm very well known here, and I've fought for that. I want to be famous here above everywhere else. In the UK, it's more important that I be known in Glasgow and London and Manchester and all, you know, all the parts of the UK than anywhere else in the world. But that means I have to forfeit that privacy. But because I can afford it, I can take my privacy and find it elsewhere.
We spoke right at the beginning about the parents who originally thought that you were really dreadful the way you behaved. They are now mostly grandparents and your fans. Their children are now parents and are fans. And their children, who weren't around when you started, are now filling the seats and buying the records. You have very subtly and very cleverly changed and...
It's not clever, but it is subtle.
Oh, it is clever.
Well, it's unintentional. I mean, all I've done is be true to my instincts, which sometimes has nothing to do with being clever. It's just with being real. I didn't want to progress faster than I was ready for myself, and therefore my fans worked. I didn't rush my fans. And I moved from musical style to musical style very gently. I didn't make one record and then change it the next. I did 4 or 5 similarly. And it was a gentle change. In fact, now one of my most annoying questions is when people say, how come you've never really changed? And I think to myself, musically, I've changed drastically. But if you play Move It and you play Devil Woman, you hear the change. But if you play Move It and High Class Baby, you don't. And you maybe don't hear it till you get to Living Doll, which is like my 4th single, and you see it, there's another change there. And it was a slow process. I promise you, it wasn't a clever thing. I didn't sit down with someone and say, look, I'm going to be around in 25 years' time, and this is what I'm going to do, you know? And it doesn't always work like that. And if you do try it, you usually come a cropper, because you're usually not ready for the change yourself. You know, you don't, in the same way as you don't govern how you mature as a man, so you don't really govern what you do musically. It ought to happen instinctively and naturally, if it's going to happen at all, so that you don't start running before you can walk. And now I'm fairly sprinting along.
We first talked to each other about 10 years ago, and then your music seemed to have a division between religious and secular. A recent album has got so much material in it that is religious or secular. It depends how you take it. Is that deliberate now?
Well, that was deliberate, obviously, because as a Christian I wanted to sing Christian music. But the Christian scene here did not bring out good Christian writers until recent years. And I didn't set out to make a gospel... No, wait a minute, tell a lie. I did. I started off making a gospel album because it was time to do one. But as I was collecting the material, I thought, wait a minute, what am I doing a gospel album for? Why don't I just do an album? These are the best songs I've heard in years, you know. So I put them all together and played them to my record company and said, look, I was going to do a gospel album, but as far as I'm concerned, I would be recording this material anyway. I'd be doing this on my next EMI album. And they said, they listened to it. They said, yeah, that's a great track. We'll have that as a single. And that was the only way out. And that was a gospel song. So I thought, wow, this is fantastic. So we then shelved the project of a, quote, gospel album and just released the new Cliff album. And that was it. That's how it came about. They just happened to be the best songs around at the time. Now, my next album might have fewer gospel songs on it because I'm still a rock pop singer, and I want to be true to my art form. In other words, I don't want to sing things just because they're gospel. I could fill my albums with gospel songs, but they wouldn't necessarily be the best songs around at the time. And I'd rather have an album full of really good material. And if it means next time I've only got 3 or 4 gospel songs, that's fine. But it's the Now You See Me, Now You Don't album you're talking about. To me, it's the first time that things have really come together. My faith and my art form came together. My faith and my career came together. I presented an album to the public, which they bought. I got a gold album for it. And it was fantastic to think that that album had 9 of the 11 tracks as they were gospel songs, Christian songs, but very subtle.
Of course, nowadays the words are printed and people can take them home and read
Correct.
them. Have you any feedback from effects that has on people?
Oh, not just yet, I don't, but I've no doubt that I will have, and I'll no doubt get letters over the years that says, oh, I didn't realize that meant that, or whatever, you know. And it takes time to filter through. Because, of course, the Christian writers now are getting far subtler. You know, you don't have to bash people over the head with crucifixes and words like God and Jesus. There are other ways of doing it. I mean, there's a song on that album called Discovering, which someone said to me, what a beautiful love song. And I said, I mean, my only retaliation was, I said, the reason why you feel it's a good love song is because it's the love song. It's actually a song about God's love. It's his love for us. Most people think of it as a man-woman relationship, but it's not. It's God-person relationship. And that's why they recognize it as being a beautiful love song.
Do you like yourself more now than you did when you started?
Yeah, I do actually. Not as much as I'm going to like myself, though.
How much are you going to like yourself?
I don't know, but it's with every sort of period of one's life, one starts to deal with what's wrong with one's life, you know. And again, you know, you can't go in front of the public. You can't go through all the things that worry you about yourself and upset you about yourself. But the whole of the Christian life is a struggle to fight what was that, as Paul put it, St. Paul put it, that old nature, which is very much alive in one's life. And you hate that side of it. You hate the potential malice that you bear. I mean, we've all got it, you know, and the Christian doesn't have it any less than anyone else. They're only forgiven for it, that's all. And of course, they have the motivation to try and clear it out. And that's what I'm trying to do with my life. I mean, whether I'm successful or not, only time will tell. But I feel better as a person because I started to think about other people more. And organizations like Tear Fund helped me do that. I suddenly became aware that I was in a position where I could help other people. Before I didn't want to help people. Then suddenly I thought, wait a minute, this is really a selfish way of living. And if you can become a little selfless, you've become a nicer person, I think. And when you start recognizing it in yourself, then you think, hey, you know, something is changing. So, I mean, I'm beginning to understand what it is to get to like me a little bit. You know, most people say, in fact, I heard a minister in South Africa when I was there. He was preaching, and he said, well, how many of you love yourselves? Nobody put their hands up. And I thought, no, I don't. And he said, it's a trick question. And he said, really, but really, you've got to love yourself. Because how can you, what was that? There's a thing in the scripture that says, love others the way you love yourself. Well, you can't love others if you don't love yourself, apparently. I mean, you've got to love others the way you love yourself. And it's a dangerous area because some people love themselves so much they think, hey, I'm so cool. That isn't what it's about. It's liking oneself and beginning to have some self-respect, and I'm just beginning to feel that now.
So when the show's over and you're scraping off the makeup and changing the clothes and so on, have you got an answer to your own question, which one is Cliff?
Not really, no. It's, no, because I think most of us are very complex people. All of us are complex beings. And we usually only show the side of us that we want to show people. But in point of fact, the one thing I've discovered is that there isn't really an answer to the question, because all of it is me. I'm involved in things that I want to be involved in, so that people can't say, well, of course, Cliff Richard is really a charity worker, or Cliff Richard is really a ballad singer because he sings Missio notes, or Cliff Richard is really a heavy rock singer because he does things like Thief in the Night. None of them are true, but all of it is true. And so therefore, really, it's a trick question. There ain't really an answer. We just have to be what we are and make the best of it.
Cliff Richard, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.